The Pilgrims and the First Thanksgiving. The sea lay quiet and gray the morning the small ship saw land. For many weeks the people aboard had known only wind, spray, and the steady tilt of the deck. Their ship was the Mayflower. It carried families who had left England to live by their faith and to make a new home. They were tired, thin, and hopeful. They believed that with patience and work a safe town could rise on the far shore. They first saw the sandy curve of Cape Cod and then searched for a good place to settle. Cold air pressed their faces. The season was late. Winter would come soon. They needed clean water, firm ground, and a harbor where their boats could rest. In the ship's cabin they wrote a simple agreement so they could govern themselves fairly. They promised to work together for the good of all. With that promise, they began. They chose a spot they called Plymouth. A low hill rose above a small harbor. Fresh water ran nearby. Open fields showed signs of earlier planting. The people who had used those fields were gone because sickness had swept through the region in earlier years. The Pilgrims saw both sadness and possibility in the scene. The land seemed to say, build, but also remember. The first winter was hard. Snow fell early. The wind pushed through cracks in the small houses they built. Many became sick. Food ran low. Firewood had to be cut even when hands were numb and legs were weak. Some days the men could not hunt. Some nights the women wrapped children in every blanket they had. A warm meal felt like a gift. A full night of sleep was rare. They survived because they helped one another. When one family had a little more grain, they shared it. When one person had strength, they fetched water for someone who could not stand. They prayed quietly and sang softly, not to wake those who finally slept. They kept watch when wolves called in the distance. They told simple stories by the fire to keep spirits from sinking. The winter did not spare them, but it did not break them. When the snow began to melt, streams spoke again. Birds returned to bare trees. The air was still cold, but it did not bite as before. People stepped outside and stood in the pale sun. It felt like a new promise. The earth was ready to wake, and so were they. One day a tall man walked into the settlement. He came openly and spoke in English. His name was Samoset. He belonged to the Abenaki, who lived to the north. He had learned English from traders along the coast. He asked for friendship and for food. He told the Pilgrims about the region, about the many nations who lived there, and about a leader named Uzamiquin, whom the English called Massasoit, of the Wampanoag. The Pilgrims listened with care. They had much to learn. Later another man visited, known to the English as Squanto. His Wampanoag name was Tisquantum. Years earlier he had been taken across the ocean and had learned English during his long journey and return. He knew the coastal lands well. He understood both the newcomers and the people who had lived on this land for generations. Tisquant became a guide and interpreter. More than that, he became a teacher. He taught the Pilgrims how to plant corn in this soil, which was different from the fields they knew. He showed them how to form small mounds, how to place fish for nourishment, and how to set the seeds at the right depth. He explained that beans could climb the corn stalks and that squash could spread across the ground to keep weeds down and the soil moist. This method, used for a long time by native peoples, was simple and wise. The Pilgrims listened and learned, step by step. The settlers cleared fields with care. They kept some trees for shade and for the health of the soil. They built fences to keep out animals that might eat young plants. They carried water from the stream in wooden buckets. They rose early and worked until their shadows grew long. They rested at midday when the sun was strong. They were learning how to live in a new place, and the land became a patient teacher. The Wampanoag watched, advised, and traded. They brought venison from the forest, fish from the rivers, and knowledge from years of living with the seasons. In return, the settlers offered tools, cloth, and help with repairs. Most of all, they tried to offer respect. They did not always understand Wampanoag customs, and the Wampanoag did not always understand English customs. But many faces showed a wish to find smooth paths rather than sharp ones. A treaty was made between the settlers and Usamequin. It promised peace and the return of goods if they were taken. It said that if one group faced danger, the other would give warning and would not harm them. The words did not solve every problem. No words can do that. But the agreement gave space for cooperation. It gave time for crops to grow and for children to sleep without fear. Spring turned into summer. The planted fields greened and then grew tall. Corn leaves rustled like quiet paper. Beans twined. Squash leaves spread into cool mats on the soil. The settlers learned which weeds to pull and which plants to leave. They learned to watch the sky for signs of rain and to find shade when the heat was strong. Work filled the days, but the work carried hope. Not every day was easy. Tools broke at the worst times. Some crops failed where the soil was too sandy or too wet. There were misunderstandings between people who did not share a language or the same ways of showing meaning. An open hand could be read as a demand when it was meant as a greeting. A firm gaze could be read as a challenge when it was meant as trust. In those moments Tisquantum's voice calmed the air. He explained what was meant and what was not. He reminded both sides to slow down and to listen first. He said that meaning often arrives after the first words, not with them. When he did this, shoulders eased and hands lowered. Work could continue. Children found their own rhythms. They carried small bundles of firewood. They brought water to gardens. They watched older children and learned to set simple traps and to gather berries without crushing them. They knew where to step near the vines. They laughed in the evenings when the air was cool. Their laughter was a promise that the settlement could have a future. By early fall the fields were full. Corn stood ripe and yellow. Beans hung in clusters, ready to dry. Squash lay heavy on the ground. Hunters brought in turkey and other game. Fishermen pulled nets that flashed with life. Baskets were filled. Sheds smelled of drying herbs and corn. The sound of grinding meal drifted from open doors. The people looked at the food and felt the tightness in their hearts' ease. There would be enough to last the winter. There might even be enough to share. The leaders decided to hold days of thanks. They would honor the harvest and the help they had received. They invited Usamequin and members of the Wampanoag to join. The invitation was a welcome, not a command. The Wampanoag came in large numbers. They brought venison, fish, and knowledge of the woods. They came with calm steps and careful eyes. The settlers felt both pride and humility when they saw so many guests. They arranged places for cooking and for sitting. They prepared extra hearths for cooking, set out clean water, and cleared a wide space so people could sit together. They planned places for games and for quiet talk. The gathering lasted several days. It was not one long meal but many moments of work, rest, talk, and eating. Fires burned low and steady. Pots hung from hooks and simmered. Meat roasted on spits. Corn bread baked in simple ovens. Squash and pumpkin were cooked until they were soft and warm. Berries sweetened porridge. The air smelled of wood smoke, herbs, and meat. People moved easily among the fires and tables. Voices rose and fell in a gentle mix of languages. There were games and contests. Men tested skill at running and at shooting arrows. Young people tried lifting and balance. Laughter rose from the fields. Children played at the edges, tossing stones into a circle or chasing one another around baskets. Music appeared as it often does when people gather. A drum pulsed slowly. A thin flute traced a simple line above it. Someone sang a call and others answered. Even those who did not know the words knew the feeling. It felt like belonging. Prayers were spoken. The settlers thanked God for the harvest, for rain and sun, and for the chance to rest. The Wampanoag offered their own thanks, in their own language, for the gifts of the earth and the return of the seasons. Both groups knew hunger. Both knew cold. Both knew relief. In that knowledge they found a meeting place that did not depend on perfect understanding. Gratitude can do that. It builds a bridge even when the words are different. Tisquantum moved among the groups with an easy step. He checked cooking pots, helped settle small disputes, and answered questions on both sides. He taught again how to store corn so that it would not spoil. He reminded the settlers to watch for signs of weather and to dry fish on high racks above damp ground. He told short stories of places along the coast and of people he had met in distant harbors. His stories were clear and practical. Each carried a lesson. At night people slept on mats and blankets near the fires. The air grew cool. Stars were sharp and bright. The forest made its night sounds, owls calling, leaves shifting, the river moving in the dark. Sometimes a child woke and looked around, then drifted back to sleep at the sight of a familiar face or the sound of a soft voice. Adults took turns keeping watch, not from fear but from calm care. A watch can be an act of love. When the days of thanks ended, the Wampanoag returned to their villages with food given in friendship and with tools repaired by the settlers. The Pilgrims stored the rest of the harvest. They stacked wood and sealed their houses against the wind. They set aside corn for seed. They checked their boats and mended their nets. The work had a steady rhythm. Winter would come, but they were ready in ways they had not been a year before. The memory of the gathering stayed with them. It was more than a feast. It was a pause to see how far they had come. It was a sign that peace was possible when people chose patience. It was also a reminder that the land was shared, and that sharing required listening and respect. The settlers still made mistakes. So did others. But the memory of shared meals and shared thanks often helped settle new disputes. People could point back and say, "We stood together then. We can try again now." As more families arrived in later years, the story of that first season of plenty was told to them. The new arrivals learned the planting methods. They learned the message of the treaty. They learned that it is wise to ask and to wait for an answer. They learned to give thanks not only for full tables but also for small things, a clear day after many storms, a recovery from illness, a kind word at the right moment. These lessons were not grand or complex. They were steady and useful. Some evenings a pilgrim mother held her child and told how the first winter had felt. She spoke about hunger and fear without adding darkness to the tale. She focused on what followed: kindness, careful work, and the patience of neighbors. She described the first harvest, the shared days of rest, and the simple games that made children laugh while adults forgot their worries for a while. She ended by saying, "We are here because many people helped one another. Remember that, and help someone else when you are able." Years passed. The settlement changed. New buildings rose. Paths turned into roads. Boats came and went more often. There were good seasons and hard ones. There were times of peace and times of strain. The treaty with Uzumequin faced tests, and not every test was passed. The world is rarely simple. Yet the idea of giving thanks at harvest time took deep root. It spread beyond one place and one season. It became a habit people returned to, the way a river returns to its bed after a flood. The Wampanoag continued to live on their lands, to fish, to hunt, and to plant. They taught their children the skills and stories of their ancestors. They met with the English when meetings were needed. They valued peace but kept their dignity. They watched the changes that came with more ships and more settlements. They made careful choices, always with the long future of their people in mind. Tisquantum did not live forever. No one does. But his work lived on in the rows of corn, in poles for beans, and in broad leaves of squash. His lessons appeared in full baskets that winter and in many winters after. The settlers remembered his patience when they taught their own children to plant in spring. They spoke his name with respect. In that way a teacher can keep walking beside people long after his voice is silent. As time moved forward, the idea of a day of thanks changed shape and size. Different communities celebrated in different ways. Some had a single day of prayer. Some had several days of meals and visiting. Some focused on the harvest. Some focused on peace after danger had passed. The words were not the same. The food was not the same. But the feeling at the center was the same: gratitude for life, for help, and for hope. Imagine now one of those autumn days. The sky is a soft blue. The air smells of smoke and fallen leaves. A child carries a small basket of corn to a storage shed. Two women laugh as they bake bread at the edge of a common fire. A man checks a net he hopes to use in spring. A group of Wampanoag visitors talk with a group of settlers about a good place to gather reeds before the first hard frost. The talk is calm. Everyone is relaxed but attentive. Work and rest sit side by side. Later, as the sun drops low, people gather again. They sit on benches or on the ground. They eat slowly. They talk quietly. They do not need long speeches to feel the meaning of the day. It is there in the full plates, in the warm hands, and in the simple fact that they are together. Someone suggests a game. Another begins a song. A baby sleeps against a mother's shoulder. A dog lies by the fire and opens one eye, then closes it again. The moment is ordinary in the best sense. Ordinary can be another word for peace. When the gathering ends, the path home is lit by lanterns. The fields are dark shapes beside the road. The stars look close. The night is cool but not harsh. People carry leftovers in small baskets. They will share them with neighbors who could not join. They will set aside food for those who are ill. They will make sure the elders have firewood stacked near their doors. This care is part of the thanks. It is thanks turned into action. In the seasons that followed, there were quarrels and worries, as there always are when people live close together. But the memory of the first Thanksgiving, the sharing, the treaty, and the patient teaching, continued to guide many choices. Parents reminded children, and leaders reminded one another, that respect is not a decoration. It is a foundation. When respect holds, the house stands in wind and rain. When it fails, even a bright day can feel cold. The story you have just walked through is not a perfect story. It does not remove the sorrow that also lived in those years. It does not hide the struggles that would come later between different peoples on this land. But it holds a clear light. It tells of people who, after a winter of pain, chose to share food, to make peace, and to say thank you. It shows how a habit of gratitude can start in one small place and echo for a long time. As night wraps around the settlement in your mind, listen for the simple sounds that end a good day. Hear the soft brush of a broom at a doorway, the click of a latch, and the last hiss of a fire being banked. Picture neat rows of corn stubble in the moonlight. Picture a river sliding past without hurry. Picture a small carved spoon washed and set aside for morning. Everything is quiet. Everything is prepared. People lie down with easier hearts. Hold one last image before sleep. It is a table under a clear sky. On it are cornbread, roasted squash, venison, and fish. There are berries and a small pot of honey. Hands reach in, not to take the most, but to share. There is room for one more person to sit. A place has been left on purpose. It reminds us that gratitude grows when there is space for a guest, a neighbor, or a friend. Breathe slowly, as a leaf falls from a tree. Let the feeling of thanks fill you the way the harvest filled the bins and barrels. And if, before sleep, you wonder what the first Thanksgiving meant to those who were there, think of this: it meant that winter could be faced with courage, that work, when shared, lightens every load, and that peace, even if it needs steady repair, is worth the care. With that thought, close your eyes. The fields are quiet. The fires are low. The night is kind. Good rest is near.